Hello, friends! Today we have not only an interesting but also rather instructive story, sometimes sad, but overall incredibly captivating. It's a tale of a major screw-up that will leave you with strong feelings. I'm sure that each of you will find something in this story for yourself, and it's very likely that you'll want to share it with your friends or acquaintances because it's truly fascinating. The story began very ordinarily and, at first glance, without any special twists. Everything was as usual. A young man in January 2019 decided to buy a Range Rover Evoque. He went online, found a suitable car, and thought he was incredibly lucky. It was almost a brand new car, just 2 months old, purchased from an official dealership, had not been registered yet, and had only 170 kilometers on the odometer. Not 170,000, but only 170 kilometers. It was like driving around the Moscow Ring Road just a couple of times. A real gift from fate. The seller assured him that the car was in perfect condition, there were no legal issues, all the purchase documents were in order, and of course, the price was below the market value. The young man was convinced that this was the opportunity of a lifetime and decided not to miss it. He bought the car, registered it in his name, and after some time, transferred it to his wife. The whole family started using the new car, paying taxes, insuring it, servicing it, and doing everything necessary for car owners. Life went on, and no one could predict what awaited them in the future. But in the middle of 2021, on a summer day, they received a summons from the court, and something told them that this wasn't just a mistake. The summons came from the Altai territory, a place they had never been connected to. They looked at the letter and, of course, assumed it was a mistake. Someone must have mixed up the address, or there was some mistake at the court office. They decided to call the court to ask what was going on. They asked a simple question: "Did you send us a summons?" The court confirmed that they indeed had sent the summons, but couldn't provide any specific information over the phone. As it turned out, it's not always possible to accurately identify the caller. However, they gave minimal information and confirmed that the case was related to their car, and that it was their wife who needed to appear in the Altai territory for the court hearing. The situation seemed completely unclear, and the people found themselves confused. Imagine this: you buy a car for 2.5 million rubles, a practically new car, with no suspicion of any problems, and suddenly you receive a court summons from another region of the country you haven't even visited. Of course, such news can bewilder anyone. So, they decided to get to the bottom of what was happening. When they contacted the court, they were told that they could review the case materials if they came to the Altai territory or send a representative with a power of attorney. Naturally, they decided to investigate, and on the spot, they found a lawyer who issued the power of attorney and sent it to the court for review of the case. And then when the lawyer passed on the information to them, the whole truth came to light, and it turned out that their car didn't have such a spotless history as they had imagined. Everything was far from what they had thought. It turns out the car had gone through several dramatic and eventful episodes before it ended up in their hands. To understand what exactly happened, we need to go back to December 2018, when a young family in Moscow was searching for their ideal car, ready to pay 2.5 million rubles for it. Meanwhile, in the Altai territory, another family was also looking for something, but not a car. They were looking for money. They went to a few organizations applying for microloans, until finally one of the organizations responded and offered to consider them for a credit application. They went to a small office of the credit organization where they met a young man, let's call him Gennady. He asked them to provide their documents for creditworthiness assessment and reviewed their information one by one. Let's start with the husband. The man took his passport, went to the computer, and after a few minutes informed them that unfortunately their loan application would not be approved. He said, "You, as a borrower, do not qualify." Then he suggested checking the wife's data. She handed over her passport, and within moments he said that there was a chance, but not everything was lost. Her application might work, but it wouldn't be that simple. They would need to follow his instructions precisely, and then most likely it would succeed because he knew how it worked and was ready to help them. However, his services would cost 10% of the loan amount. The husband and wife naturally agreed, and everything went according to plan. Gennady made a copy of the woman's passport, took her photo, filled out the form, and explained how to answer the questions when the bank called to verify the information. He gave them detailed instructions on what to say. It was a real guide for the upcoming calls, and after that meeting the couple went home, waiting for the bank's call. After a while the bank called and asked those very questions that Gennady had trained them to answer. Everything went according to plan, and a few hours later, Gennady called back with great news. A loan of 1.2 million rubles had been approved. Can you imagine? He told them to come to the office, sign the documents, and pick up the money. The family gathered their things and of course took a bag with them, not just for no reason, but to have a place to store such a large sum of money. The passport and the bag were with them when they arrived at Gennadi's office. He greeted them with a smile and said that everything was ready. He handed them a packet of documents and asked them to sign everything necessary in a few places. But it was at this moment, when it seemed that things were going according to plan, that the situation could take a completely unexpected turn. Suddenly, they asked a question that seemed entirely natural. What's this car loan? We're not buying a car, we want a regular consumer loan to buy home appliances, not a car. Gennadi smiled and explained that it was just a formality, a technicality he had invented, so they could get the amount they needed. He assured them not to worry, that it wouldn't affect their plans and that everything would go as usual. He promised them they would receive a payment schedule, would pay off the loan, and it would be a regular consumer loan for them. And of course, they believed him. So, they signed all the papers and the documents were handed over. At this point, another question came up, but now it was a completely different one. Gennadi, where's the money? They asked, and he smiled and replied, well, where else? We live in the 21st century. Everything is electronic now. Look how convenient. The money will be deposited into your account, and as soon as it arrives, we'll immediately transfer it to your card. You don't need to deal with cash. You can pay by card or withdraw money. It's quick and easy. This, of course, sounded very tempting, and they believed him. Gennadi said, go home. Think about how to spend the 1.2 million rubles, and don't forget to keep an eye on the bank's notifications. As soon as you get an SMS saying your card has been topped up, that means the process has started. They went home, waited, and indeed, after some time, the money arrived in their account. But then something strange happened. The amount was significantly smaller than they had expected. Instead of the promised 1.2 million rubles, the balance was much lower. They immediately called Gennadi asking about the mistake and why the amount didn't match up. Gennadi replied, what mistake? There's no mistake. It's normal. The money comes in installments, in tranches. The first tranche is always small. You've received the first part. The rest will come after the New Year holidays. Our bank is also on vacation right now, so everything will be fine, but after the holidays. For now, this small sum is just for you to go shopping. Get started on your plans. Prepare. Gradually, everything will be fine. Don't worry. After the New Year, of course, no miracles happened. The holidays ended, but the money never arrived. Gennadi apparently disappeared. At first, he continued to answer the phone, giving them the same excuses, telling them that everything would be fine, that the bank was delaying the payments, that he would transfer the money in a week and then again in another week. But at some point, Gennadi's phone simply stopped answering. He vanished from all radars. He wasn't at the office, and the family started to realize they had fallen into a trap. And this raises the question, how did it happen that two families, one from Moscow and the other from the Altai territory, ended up connected to this man and this story? So, where did the paths of these two families cross? It all began at the end of November 2018, when a brand new Range Rover Evoque was purchased from an official dealership. However, the car was not immediately registered, and the reason was that it had been involved in a scheme to obtain credit. To avoid damaging the original, clean, and beautiful vehicle registration document, PTS, they decided to make a counterfeit one. The fake PTS contained almost all the information from the original, but the forgery was, to put it mildly, of poor quality. We have a photograph, a copy of the original PTS, and a copy of the fake one, and it's immediately obvious from these documents that the forgery is simple and primitive. The font on the fake document differs from the original, and if you simply compare the two, it becomes clear that this was a sloppy job. For example, the front side of the first vehicle registration document was filled out using a printer, unlike the original where the information was written by hand. Also, you can see that the field where the owners are listed repeats the first two entries, the dealership where the car was bought and the person who purchased it. But there are several differences. The stamps on the fake are different from those on the original. And the fields were filled out using a computer, not by hand. The font on the fake PTS is also noticeably different from the original in terms of height and thickness. Additionally, if you carefully examine the fake, you can see that the section for special remarks is missing data about the recycling fee, the ERA GLONASS number, and custom stamps, all of which are present in the original. One of the most glaring mistakes in the forgery is the stamp that should be at the bottom. The original PTS has a custom stamp, But on the fake one, there is a stamp from the traffic police, which of course has no business being on a document supposedly issued by customs. And it was this counterfeit vehicle registration document, PTS, that Gennady and his accomplices submitted to the bank to obtain the auto loan. Yes, this was the very same clumsy, cheap document, literally thrown together at the last minute. And here's where I have an important question. How could the bank, or more specifically the person who was checking these documents, not notice that they were being handed an obvious forgery? To overlook such an obvious fake, you'd really have to try hard, especially since this is an important document that the bank should be carefully reviewing.
Think about it. How could this happen? How could people who deal with documents and official samples every day not notice such glaring inconsistencies and mistakes in the fake PTS? To miss such an obvious forgery, you'd have to put in some serious effort. That's the first point. And secondly, I have to wonder, how could an auto loan have been signed for a car that no one even inspected? I see two possibilities here. The first is the classic scheme where someone simply turns a blind eye and pretends they've seen the car when they actually haven't. They sign documents confirming they've inspected the vehicle. The second, more complex option is that the car could have been transported from Moscow to the Altai territory on a tow truck, shown to the bank representative, and then returned. But honestly, I'm more inclined to believe the first version. I doubt anyone would go through the hassle of a tow truck for this. Returning to the PTS, the fake document differs from the original in that the third field lists a legal entity, which supposedly bought the car. This legal entity, according to the fake documents, appears as the seller in the bank's records, and the car is supposedly transferred to them, not the actual buyer. On this basis, the dealership receives the loan money through the bank. The next part of the scheme goes like this. The people approached Gennady, he prepared the documents, submitted them to the bank, deceiving everyone, and the bank transferred the money to the legal entity listed in the PTS. The legal entity, in turn, creates a fake document saying that the car has been transferred to the borrower and the transaction is completed. The money from the legal entity is then cashed out and withdrawn. The scheme is quite simple but highly effective, and as it turned out, it wasn't used just once. One part of this process also struck me. When I reviewed the application, it stated that the woman's salary was 170,000 rubles, information that was likely entered not by the borrowers themselves, but by Gennady, or one of his assistants. This was confirmed when the bank called, and based on this, the bank approved the loan for the car. Now, the situation looks like this. The bank has filed a lawsuit demanding the full loan amount plus interest, penalties, and state duty. In the end, the total amount with interest exceeds 1.3 million rubles. But on top of that, the bank is also requesting that the court seize the car as collateral and sell it at auction. And imagine what happens next. The people who bought the car for 2.5 million rubles, who have the original PTS, who didn't take a loan for this car and didn't deal with any legal entities, now have to face the possibility that this car could be taken from them. At this point, the situation is still not completely resolved, and there is no conclusion to the story yet. But many are asking the question, what happened to Gennady? How did his fate unfold? This story does indeed have an interesting twist, and I'll share more about it a bit later. But before that, I want to take a moment to provide some important information and tell you about a new service called Garage from Auto.ru, a place where car owners can get discounts, promotions, and special offers from partners. You can also keep track of deals and your OSAGO, compulsory car insurance policy. Currently, there are exclusive offers and promotions available from Renaissance Insurance in the Garage service for car owners. You can get a discount of up to 20% on purchasing a Casco policy or up to 25% on a Casco plus OSAGO package. To get the discount, you just need to complete a few simple steps. First, you need to add your car to the virtual garage. It's completely free and very easy. All you need to do is provide the car's VIN. Second, you'll need to go from your garage to the Renaissance promotion page, calculate the cost of the insurance using the online calculator, and submit the application within 24 hours. Once Renaissance operators confirm the application, you can complete the purchase of your policy with a discount. Important note, this promotion is valid until March 31st, 2022, and it applies only to new Renaissance clients. You can find more detailed information about the promotion's terms on the screen. I'll leave the link to the virtual garage in the description below the video. Follow the link, add your card to the virtual garage, and gain access to exciting offers from Auto.ru's partners. You'll also be able to track company reviews and monitor your OSAGO policy to ensure that it doesn't expire unexpectedly. Now, let's return to our story. Gennadi's situation is really bad. A criminal case has been initiated against him for fraud on a particularly large scale. As the investigation revealed, from October 2018 to January 2019, this enterprising young man deceived more than 10 people, and the total amount of stolen funds amounted to 14 million rubles. He used counterfeit PTS vehicle registration documents, recruited people as drops, fronts, manipulated their situations to obtain auto loans, and used multiple legal entities to withdraw money from the bank and launder the funds. All of this allowed him to set up a small criminal enterprise and steal 14 million rubles. As of today, the case has been transferred to court. Just yesterday, before preparing for this video, I checked the court's website for updates, a hearing was recently held, and a guilty verdict was issued in the case. However, the sentence has not yet been published on the court's website, so I can't provide information on what punishment Gennadi will face at this moment. If you're interested, I'll be following the development of the situation and will update you about it on Instagram. By the way, if you want to stay informed, follow me on Instagram. I update information as soon as it becomes available. Friends, today's story that I shared with you is indeed sad, but unfortunately, it was entirely predictable for all of its participants. Someone wanted to buy a car at a lower price and didn't check what they were actually purchasing. After all, the car was bought in January 2019, but information about the car's lien appeared in the registry back in December. This information could have been easily verified, and if it had been, things might have turned out very differently. If a car is pledged to a bank, it doesn't prevent the car from being registered. This information is available in the registry, and the car can be legally registered with the traffic police, even if it has an outstanding loan on it. So when you buy a car, it's crucial to check these things yourself. The best way is to obtain a statement confirming that there are no records of liens or other issues with the vehicle. This way, if something comes up later, you'll be able to resolve the issue more quickly. For example, if questions arise a month, 2 months, or even a year later, having the statement will help you deal with the situation more smoothly. I especially want to draw your attention to new and nearly new cars. This is a particularly risky segment. I'm not saying you shouldn't buy these cars. You can, if they meet your budget and needs, but they need to be checked very carefully. These days, criminals are actively working with cars that are still under credit, particularly those that have just been purchased. This scheme operates widely and quickly, and unlike the case we discussed today, these situations often remain hidden much faster. The story we're talking about, as I've mentioned, is entirely predictable, and unfortunately, it's becoming a very common occurrence. Car fraud isn't a new scheme, but it continues to thrive, and each year that passes, criminals become more sophisticated. I'm sure that many of you might find this situation familiar, and that should be concerning. Nowadays, there are countless ways to deceive unsuspecting buyers, and this scheme with fake PTS and car loans is one of the most widespread. An important point: these situations are becoming increasingly common. Right now, criminal groups in Russia and other countries such as Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and others are actively using cars bought under financing schemes to launder money through the banks. And what's most dangerous is that sometimes they walk away with the money, leaving people in very difficult situations.
Fraudsters are very well versed in how the car loan system works. They understand that some people who want to buy a car may not always be aware that a car loan isn't always as clean and transparent as it seems. Even if you find the perfect car at a great price, it's important to remember that things aren't always as perfect as they appear at first glance. Unfortunately, the car sales market has a large number of dishonest sellers, and banks often don't conduct thorough checks to identify potential fraud. Nevertheless, many buyers who encounter problems after purchasing a car fail to understand that they should have consulted professionals in advance to avoid such situations. This applies both to the legal verification of the vehicle and its technical inspection. Many people ignore the importance of checking the history of the vehicle and its documents before making a purchase, which leads to unpleasant consequences. Unfortunately, all these stories are not rare, and they are becoming increasingly common. Returning to our story, it's worth noting that many of the participants in this crime didn't realize how far they would go with their deceit. For instance, the very people who signed the loan agreements probably didn't understand that they were effectively signing their own sentence, not just financially, but legally as well. They trusted the person who promised them easy money and didn't think about the consequences of their actions. Of course, we have no right to judge those who became part of the scheme, but it must be acknowledged that they became victims of fraud. The example with Gennady and his colleagues clearly demonstrates how far such criminals can go without fearing the consequences. They didn't just use counterfeit documents, they also deceived the banks, making huge sums of money in the process. I'm sure that they didn't attempt these schemes just once, and perhaps many people were lucky that they didn't end up in the same situation. Fraudsters often use people in difficult situations as drops. These individuals frequently don't realize that their documents will be used in fraudulent schemes. In our story, for example, people who were simply trying to get a loan didn't know that their personal data would be used to deceive the banking system. All of this was made possible by a clever scheme in which all participants played their part. Gennady was the one who helped direct the situation in the right direction, while the banks in turn accepted the documents without proper verification. A note for those unfamiliar with this process. Banks are obligated to carry out more thorough checks of documents before approving an auto loan. But as we can see from this story, the checks are not always sufficient and they aren't always effective. Therefore, it's crucial to understand that you should always verify the history of the car and its documents before signing anything. Even if the car looks perfect, you shouldn't rush into the purchase unless a full check has been done. Many people mistakenly believe that the car they are buying will always be legally clean. But in reality, there are a large number of cases where people purchase cars with hidden problems. These issues can be both legal and technical, and as we see, this story is no exception. As for the scheme with car loans, it's not that complicated. Fraudsters use fake documents to get a loan for a car that either doesn't exist or doesn't belong to the person applying for the loan. This can be done using fraudulent PTS, vehicle registration documents, that look very plausible but are just copies. To avoid such situations, always check all the documents and the vehicle's history before making a purchase. Even if the car looks perfect, you shouldn't rush into the purchase unless a full check has been done. The process of one person trying to deceive the system might seem easy, but in reality, it's a very complicated and dangerous path that will eventually lead to consequences. It's important to remember that all participants in the scheme, regardless of their roles, will ultimately be held accountable for their actions. And as we see in this example, even those who weren't directly involved may become victims of deception, as in the case of the borrowers who fell into the credit trap. Recently, in light of everything happening, we can notice that the car market is becoming increasingly complicated, and fraudsters are becoming more and more clever in their schemes. There are many ways to deceive people, and it's important to always be on guard. When it comes to cars bought on credit, such vehicles require special attention. Even if you think you found the perfect deal, there's always a risk that the car might be pledged or used in fraudulent schemes. It's important to understand that the car market is not only one of the largest, but also one of the most vulnerable to various scams. We all know how easy it is to fall into the hands of fraudsters, especially when it comes to expensive and popular cars. It is precisely in these situations that fraudsters show their ingenuity and use all of their creativity to deceive people and profit from it.
Often, car buyers, especially those doing it for the first time or without enough experience, can become victims of various fraudsters. They don't always realize that they're being deceived not only through forged documents, but also through the entire purchasing process. This can include inflated prices, fake papers like the PTS, or even hidden histories of the vehicle. Far from all car buyers know how important it is to check the car's history before buying, and they often focus only on the car's external appearance and price. However, these criteria are usually false indicators, and everything that seems too good to be true often is. That's why it's so important for a car buyer to know a few basic things about checking a vehicle. First and foremost, you must make sure that the car is not pledged to a bank. If it is, this can affect all further actions with the vehicle, including its registration and possible sale. It's important to note that if the car you're financing is already pledged, it could be seized if the loan is not repaid. As a result, you could lose not only the car, but also all the money you invested in its purchase. So, what can you do to avoid such situations? First and foremost, don't trust too good to be true offers. If you see a car being sold at a price significantly lower than the market value, this should raise a red flag. If, on top of that, the seller refuses to provide all the necessary documentation, that's a clear signal to walk away from the deal. Especially in the case of cars bought on credit, it's crucial to always check all the documents, including the PTS, vehicle registration document, and the car's history. In some cases, it's worth reaching out to professional experts who can help you assess the situation and verify all the details. Additionally, always check documents through notarial registries and other official sources to rule out possible forgeries and fraud. But that's not all. Today you may encounter another fairly common scheme. Fraudsters often use so-called drops, people who typically have no idea that their documents are being used for fraud. These individuals might sign papers for a car purchase, unaware that the vehicle will be used in a fraudulent scheme. Therefore, it's important not only to verify the car itself, but also to check who is selling it and what documents are being provided. If a person can't provide you with all the necessary documentation, that's already a reason to be cautious. Fraudsters involved in such activities usually don't care much about the consequences of their actions. They will use anything they can to make money without thinking about how their actions could destroy the lives of others. Specifically, they don't worry about the fact that the deceived car buyer may end up in a very difficult situation. It's essential to remember that even if you think you found the perfect deal, it might not always be what it seems. Eventually, you'll face the reality when the car turns out to be pledged, and you won't be able to sell or exchange it without dealing with legal issues. So, what can you do to avoid these unpleasant situations? The answer is simple. You need to be extremely cautious and vigilant. Checking the car's history, consulting with professionals, and using all available means to ensure the legitimacy of the deal are all steps that can help you avoid negative consequences. If you're buying a car on credit, always check if it's pledged. If such facts are hidden, you risk losing not only your money, but the car itself. One of the most crucial aspects is how cleverly fraudsters can disguise their actions. They can use perfectly legal documents, such as the PTS, and make their forgery so convincing that it becomes difficult to detect without professional help. However, if you carefully check all the documents and the vehicle's history, including registry entries and notarial data, you can avoid such deception. Car fraud can take many different forms. In one case, it could be document forgery, in another, it could be overpricing, and in a third, it could involve cars that were never owned by the seller. In each of these cases, it is crucial not to rush into the purchase and always consult experts. For example, if the seller refuses to provide the necessary documents or cannot explain certain details, that should already be a reason to walk away from the deal. It's important to understand that trust in such transactions is not just a matter of words, it is something much more serious. If you're unsure about the legality of the deal, it's better to walk away. Thus, the main recommendation for anyone looking to buy a car is always to be cautious and alert. This applies to both new and used cars. It's important to remember that only a thorough check of the car's history, documents, and consultation with professionals can help you protect yourself from fraud. With the advancement of technology, fraudsters are becoming increasingly sophisticated in their schemes. They find new ways to manipulate the system, and even banks don't always manage to track all the risks adequately. Therefore, it's essential for car buyers to be armed with knowledge about how the process works. Remember that a car is not just a mode of transportation. It's also a significant financial investment, and the attention you give to checking the car will not only determine your financial well-being, but also your future. Continuing the topic of car fraud, it's worth mentioning that these schemes are most often used in relation to new or nearly new cars. This is because these cars evoke the most trust. Sellers of such cars often exploit this trust by manipulating buyers' expectations. Even if a car seems perfect, you should always remember the potential risks. Unfortunately, stories of car fraud happen regularly, and every case is a lesson for all of us. So always stay alert, check the documents, and if anything raises doubts, it's better to walk away from the deal. One of the most dangerous moments when buying a car is failing to pay attention to details. Often, people, in an effort to save time or money, don't want to conduct a thorough inspection of the car, thinking that its condition will be perfect or that all the documents are in order. It is precisely in such cases that fraudsters can use their tricks, knowing that the buyer won't be overly cautious. Such cases lead to situations where the person who bought the car faces serious legal and financial issues, which could result in not only losing money, but also losing the car. Let's take, for example, the situation with cars bought on credit. It might seem like nothing serious, just the usual process of buying a car on credit. But here lies the danger. If the car is pledged to a bank, it can create problems with its registration, sale, or even its use on the road. Fraudsters often offer such cars hiding their true status, and buyers don't always realize the pitfalls until they encounter issues later on. Sellers of cars with hidden defects may use all sorts of tricks to avoid revealing the true condition of the car. Sometimes they act as if the car has no problems. Other times they conceal information about loans or pledges, or they hide important details about the car's history. With these schemes, they deceive trusting buyers who don't expect to be caught in such traps. And when the buyer begins to investigate after the purchase, they are faced with huge difficulties, from the inability to register the car to legal battles with banks and insurance companies. This becomes particularly relevant when the car has just been purchased, because many buyers think that a nearly new car couldn't possibly be involved in legal issues. But, as we see from this example, cars that seem absolutely new are often part of various fraudulent schemes. These could involve fraudulent PTS or completely falsified documents on vehicles that no one checks. So, how can you avoid falling into this trap? First and foremost, it's important to understand that checking the vehicle's history is not just a recommendation, but an essential step when buying a car. Skipping this step can cost you your financial security. First, you must ensure that the car is not placed to a bank. If it is, this can affect all further actions with the vehicle, including its registration and possible sale. Second, aside from checking the PTS, don't forget the mandatory check for recycling fees, fines, and other debts that might be hidden from your view. Fraudsters, on their hand, always seek to exploit buyers' lack of knowledge. They know that not everyone is willing to spend a lot of time and effort checking the car, and that many buyers simply don't have enough knowledge about how the registration process works or what hidden problems might exist. This is precisely what criminals rely on, offering cars with forged or partially altered documents. Typically, the schemes we're talking about vary, but they all are built on one main idea. The buyer is not provided with all the information about the vehicle. The problem is not just that the car might be pledged, but also that the car's history is manipulated. For example, if the car was in an accident, it can be fixed so that it appears brand new. These issues are not immediately obvious, and they're hard to recognize without specialized checks. Problems with the body, hidden defects in the engine, or concealed issues with the electronics, all of these can be patched up and hidden for a while. The inability to conduct a thorough inspection of the car is one of the biggest problems faced by buyers. Even if a buyer decides to consult specialists, they are not always able to gain access to the full history of the car. Many of us may not know about the existence of registries where pledged cars or vehicle histories can be checked. In Russia, there are several such registries, covering various aspects from lien data to information about fines, checking numbers, and much more. Unfortunately, not all buyers know about these sources or even how to use them. To avoid falling into these traps, buyers must be proactive. It's crucial to verify the car's history through official channels and to consult professionals who can provide detailed checks. Only by doing so can you protect yourself from fraud and ensure that the car you are purchasing is legally clean and free from hidden problems. It's important to note that such registries are available to everyone, and any buyer can access information about a vehicle by checking it through the relevant government and private services. However, for this to happen, you need to at least once consider not only inspecting the car, but also understanding its legal status. The psychological aspect of purchasing a car also plays a crucial role. Often people want to get the car as soon as possible because they've already fallen for its appearance or features. This desire can become one of the main reasons why buyers don't check the documents and the history of the vehicle, thinking that nothing bad will happen. And if the seller continues to assure the buyer that all the documents are in order and there's no cause for concern, the buyer is likely to believe that the deal is safe. Fraudsters use these psychological tricks to make the buyer feel comfortable and confident until the moment of truth. Then it turns out that the car is not what it was presented as, and that there are problems associated with it that could cost far more than the car itself. Schemes involving document forgery, fake PTS, and misleading financial institutions are nothing new, but they continue to bring in profits. At the same time, it's important